Is the Spirit's ministry in our life today the same as it was in the Old Testament? Well, we've been answering that question, and up to this point, one of the things we've seen is the Spirit actually dwells in us. He doesn't just come upon us, as we've been seeing he did with these Old Testament people. I'm Pastor Tim Holscher, and we are looking at the ministry of the Spirit. We're coming to an end of these studies, but we're making some contrast, drawing some contrast between today's ministry of the Spirit and the ministry in the Old Testament. And by Old Testament, I want you to keep in mind that also includes the Gospels, because that is prior to the cross and the resurrection of Christ. So in Romans 8:9, with regard to us, it says that the Spirit of God dwells, like dwelling in a house is the verb over here to oikeo. He dwells in you. So the Spirit dwells in us. In dwelling in us, it says that God has given the Spirit in our hearts. He dwells in us. He dwells in our hearts as a pledge, as a down payment. That pledge or down payment is not just a guarantee against the future, but it's also the fact that right now in the present, we can experience some of the benefits that are coming in the future. We can live these things out. And so this is something started in our past, and it's an experience in the present, but ultimately a pledge or a guarantee towards the future. And that's part of the Spirit dwelling in our hearts today. So the Spirit's work in us today is going to be about service, but service is part of our salvation, and all of this is part of our salvation. But if we go to the Old Testament, we're going to find a man by the name of Balaam. He was a prophet. And Balaam was hired for money to come and curse God. And Balaam was willing to do that, but God has stopped him. And some of us, you've read the story about Balaam traveling and what he ended up having with the ass that he was riding on and had to get off and threatened it and all of that. This is that Balaam going to do something God tells him not to do. And he's hired by Balak, the king of the Moabites, who wants him to curse Israel because he's terrified of this mass of people moving across their region. And so he says, please come, I will take you to another place. Maybe it would be agreeable to God that you can put a curse on them for me there. And Balaam doesn't hesitate. He goes along with Balak, this king. He's going to do this if this is what's possible. But what takes place is when we get down to chapter 24 and verse 2, it says, Then Balaam looked up and saw Israel encamped tribe by tribe, and the Spirit of God came to be upon him, and he proclaimed his poem, and it's a poem that blesses Israel. Much to Balak's frustration, I paid you to curse them, and you actually blessed them. But it's happened because the Spirit of God comes upon Balaam. So the Spirit comes upon this man. Was Balaam a believer? I don't know. People go, well, how could the Spirit come on an unbeliever? The Spirit could come upon him to enable him to speak something truthfully. This happens in the Gospel of John when we have the high priest who actually votes for the death of Christ, and he prophesies. And it tells us in John that he prophesied that year because he was priest and he prophesies accurately about the death of Christ. I don't think he looks at it as though he's going to sacrifice himself for the nation so we can have salvation. He looks, get rid of this guy so our nation can continue. Let's kill and off him. So God can, and it doesn't tell us the Spirit caused him to prophesy over there, but we might assume he did. We just don't have a clear statement. But the same thing is true here as we look at Balak. We don't know, is the man a believer or an unbeliever? And Balaam, and Balaam is used as a negative example in the New Testament of a person that would sell their services for money, their services that we would consider services for God. Move on to another man by the name of Samson. It's amazing. We write books about Samson for kids. This strong man, and he's a behemoth. He's so strong, like all of this. And I don't know that I would write a children's book on Samson, other than to say, you know what, Samson, God gave him some strength, and Samson probably didn't look like a monstrous behemoth of a man. He had supernatural strength given to him by God for these purposes. But I don't know that I'd write a children's book because he's not a moral man. And we see that at the beginning of Judges 14:1, Samson went down to Timnah, and he saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. The Philistines, if you don't remember, are Israel's enemies. They're causing Israel problems. And he came back and told his father and mother, I saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines, so now get her for me as a wife. And I'd say, boy, Well, notice what they say. But his father and his mother said to him, "Is there no woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all our people that you go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" Yet Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, because she is right. She is right for me." In other words, he says, I want her, even if she is, well, even if she's not, morally right. I hope you understand that. And so his father and mother don't know that God is using these sexual urges, let's say that way, this interest in this woman that Samson's having, that God's actually using these to move Samson against the Philistines. Because what's going to happen in this context is that the spirit who comes on Samson and gives him strength in these things is going to start by the Spirit of the Lord rushes upon him when he's met by a lion, and he tears it apart like you tear apart a young goat. So this is abnormal strength. I hope you understand. We just look at this as though he's muscle-bound man, grabs the lion and fights him. He's supernaturally empowered because the Spirit rushes upon him. The Spirit comes and gives him this strength. This is an example of his strength. But this killing of the lion gives rise to a riddle that he tells the men down there in the village where this woman is from. And so when he goes down there to this village, and he essentially makes a wager, makes a bet, with this, he loses the bet because the woman susses the answer out of the riddle, tells it to them, and now he's going to have to pay it. But guess what? They're going to pay for it because the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon, another one of the Philistine cities, and killed 30 men of them, and took what they were wearing and gave the outfits of the clothes to those who told the riddle. And his anger burned, and he went out of his father's house, and then the wife, the woman that he was going to have, now she's given to somebody else in this context. But the Holy Spirit uses Samson's strength, uses this situation that Samson finds himself in, and uses it to actually bring about the death of a number of these Philistines. And this is going to happen again. In fact, at a later time, we're told over in Judges 16, again, not a moral man, says Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot or a prostitute there, and he went into her. You doesn't have an imagination to figure out what's happening. And so while he's there, staying around, you find out that these Philistines, these people from Gaza, they are spending all night around this city, waiting for him. But at verse 3, because they're going to kill him, Samson lay until midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the city gate and the 2 posts and pulled them up. That means he pulls them up out of the ground along with the bars, and he put them on his shoulders. See, I don't care who you are. You can lift weights and you can be what's considered the strongest man in the world today, and you don't have the ability to yank this stuff up by hand and throw them on your shoulders. This is absolutely supernatural strength of the Holy Spirit. But what it does is that it actually weakens that city, because now it has weakened their defense, because now they don't have a gate to shut to make their wall more secure. But all of this comes down to the fact that he happens to be down there and this is not an insignificant city where he is down here, that we have Samson moved by the Spirit to do something. Last one to look at is in 1 Samuel chapter 19. In verse 20, and Saul sent messengers to take David. Saul is the king. He's threatened by David. David's not threatening him, but he in his mind is threatened by David. But when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, with Samuel standing and presiding over them, it says the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul. And of course, and they also prophesied. So these men, are they believers or not? I don't know, but the Spirit comes on, makes them prophesy, and as a result of prophesying, they're not able to take David because it stops them. It's not that the prophecy itself is like, oh, don't take him. It's just that they're prophesying and they're occupied with that, and David's able to escape from these men. Is Samson a believer? I don't know. Is Balaam a believer? I don't know. All we know is in each one of these, what the Spirit is doing with them is about giving them strength, giving them the ability to prophesy. It's these things. It's not about giving them a down payment on their salvation so that they can be growing and maturing and be sure of their future. It's none of that. It has the Spirit's coming upon them as a completely different purpose. And I hope you can see that. I chose these three examples because these are three men that I think we probably legitimately could question whether or not they're real believers or not. But that didn't stop God from being able to use them, just as he did with the high priest over in John, to use those men to do something on behalf of Israel or on behalf of God's purpose, rather than doing something for their personal salvation or their personal growth. You never find Samson growing and maturing. You never see Balaam growing and maturing. In fact, eventually Balaam is going to die in a battle with Israel. And these prophets of Saul, we know nothing more of this other than that God uses this to stop them. That's a contrast. I don't know how else to read this. This is a contrast to what we have today. And I think it's important to contrast, because you need to understand your relationship to the Spirit today is better than any relationship that you're going to see of the Spirit in the Old Testament, even in the Gospels. That's very important for us to understand and appreciate. And with that, I ask you to enjoy your relationship with the Holy Spirit today. Enjoy the things that He's doing in your life, and have a good day in the Lord. Thank you for joining me.